Now, this week, here on the show that you love, Mastering Dungeons, we are going to talk for our main segment about Chapter 4 of the 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide. This is all about NPCs. Last week, we finished covering Chapter 3, which was about building encounters and adventures. Now we're going to look at what we put into those adventures to keep the players occupied, to keep them entertained. And one of those things are non-player characters. What does the chapter tell us about non-player characters? A non-player character is any character controlled by the dungeon master. NPCs can be enemies or allies, regular folk or named monsters. They include the local innkeeper, the old wizard who lives in the tower on the outskirts of town, the Death Knight out to destroy the kingdom, and the dragon counting gold in its cavernous lair. This chapter shows you how to flesh out non-player characters in your game. Why does it have to be an old wizard in the
It
tower?
always is,
Why
right?
can't it
Yeah.
be a young, sprightly? I'm being
Because it takes
called
so
out
long to
there.
study.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. So what this introduction fails to mention, and not just fail to mention here, but fail to mention throughout the chapter, is that NPCs are really tools. And why do we have these tools? These tools are there for a dungeon master to insert themselves into a game, sometimes necessarily, sometimes elegantly, in not just the game, not just the mechanics, but also the story. It's a it's a good hallmark for a complex role-playing game like D&D, for the DM to be able to control things without using a very heavy hand.
Mhm.
And that needs to be the next part of this. Why why do you have these NPCs at your disposal? What can you do with them? Why is it good to be able to have somebody with the party while they're adventuring that you have input into? uh,
Yeah.
it really doesn't say that.
And Shawn, I think I have an idea for the why this does this. And it's because this is what we've always done. So, like, I was looking at, the good old 2E, and,
Mhm.
this page is like lists of occupations of possible
Mhm.
NPC professions, right? The sauce maker, the glazier who cuts and sets
Mhm.
glass. Like, it's trying to fit in like little insertions into the game of things that must be there. And in fact, if you go earlier than the second edition DMG, while there are professions listed, a lot of it, and the write up even in the third edition, tends to be focused on the idea of like when characters need the sage, there should be a sage NPC. And the rest is
Mhm.
just like whatever. Like, just,
Mhm.
if you have to be the shopkeeper, well, be the shopkeeper. I'm not going to address this at all. And fourth
Mhm.
edition actually looks a lot like fifth edition. It's got, the same tables we're going to look at. It's got the same kind
Mhm.
of charts and concepts. Like a lot of this idea of like allies, all this, it all comes from fourth edition. And so it's almost like every person creating a DMG just takes what's come before, does very minor tweaks to it, and we end up in the same place, right? While meanwhile, the way we play the game is evolving massively. There's huge
Mhm.
differences in how we look at the use of NPCs between first edition, second edition, third edition, and now, right?
Mhm. Yeah, it used to be right for AD&D. It was you go, you get the quest. Sometimes you don't even role play it out. You are just told there's this dungeon. You start the adventure, you're on your way to the dungeon that you heard about from someone, whether it's a shopkeeper or a merchant or the king or the queen or whomever. And so that's what, and then you complete the dungeon. Maybe you have some hirelings who carry things around for you, but maybe not.
Mm-hmm.
And you go back to town and you sell your stuff, but we're not going to role play it. We're just, yeah. And with the advent of streamed games and the talent of the people running those games, we start to see the memorable video game RPG character make its appearance in our tabletop role playing game RPGs. And it has been a huge change.
Mhm. Yeah, and but also, just people running great campaigns where it matters what your relationship is with the as a player with these NPCs, and learning their secrets and interacting with them is great. Or even just the throwaway ones where you play at a table with the DM that just creates interesting characters that they're making up right then and there. And you as a DM realize like, oh, when my players suddenly decide that they need to find a uh, place that sells glass bottles, whatever they come up with, and you're like, sure, okay, yeah, there's a glass blower around here, and you invent the glass blower and their shop and whoever else works there, and you have to make those interesting. And what's fascinating to me about the 5e, as far as we've gotten into, here we are in 2014 creating this, and it doesn't really help me do any of that. Doesn't help me improvise. It doesn't, like you said, it doesn't say, here's the role of NPCs. Here's how they're your voice, right? Like often when I've written adventures for organized play or large events, I will specifically say, this NPC can be your voice to guide the characters, right? If they start going
Mhm.
off kilter, this NPC knows what needs to be done and can stay on goal, right? Um,
Mhm.
and none of that is in the 5e DMG. There are some neat things in there that I enjoy and I think
Mhm.
are good ideas, a little heavy-handed, but we'll go into the details. But it does not have as an approach
Mhm.
what you're talking about or what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So one of the things that it sort of tries to do is just give you ideas
Yeah.
for how to create an NPC quickly. Lots and lots of tables, which are great ways to eat up page count, um, even if they're not necessarily something that you as a DM need because you've already been through the ringer since the 70s on creating NPCs on the fly. So what I wanted to look at was in fiction writing, you hear a lot of people talk about methods of characterization. If you read how-to books, you'll get 10 steps for creating a character, 2 steps for creating a character, 5 steps for creating a character. And you get all these different numbers.
Huh.
Uh, if it says 2, it's usually either direct or indirect characterization. You're either told or you can infer what the character's
Mm.
like. 10 will be like subcategories uh, of different categories, but I like to break it down to 4 when I teach. It's a description. What does
Mhm.
this character look like as told to me by the narrator or other characters? You can characterize through action. What does the character do?
Mm.
What does it look like when they do it? Why do they do it? How do they do it? Dialogue. What does the character say? How do they say it? Why do they say it? And then their thoughts, their inner dialogue. What do they think? Why do they think? How does what they think conflict with what they say or how they act or how they're described? You'll also get things like character's name can be
Mhm.
important in their characterization. How the character judges others. Those can be broken out as separate, but they really all fit into those categories: description, action, dialogue, and thought.
Mm.
So, as we talk about what this DMG chapter discusses, we can go back and we can look at how what this chapter is really doing is just giving you ways to characterize these NPCs rather than how to actually use them. So, you want to take us through the first little part here
Yeah.
of designing NPCs?
Yeah, so it says nothing brings your adventures and campaigns to life better than a cast of well developed NPCs. That said, NPCs in your game rarely need as much complexity as a well crafted character in a novel or movie. Most NPCs are bit players in the campaign, whereas the adventurers are the stars. So yeah, it's great. Like for
Mhm.
sure, don't forget that it's the story of your players that are there, but it doesn't really give you the tips that I think are important. Like for example, when I think of the players being the feature, avoid having two NPCs talk to each other, especially for
Mhm.
any great amount of time,
Right.
right? Like those are the kind of things that's easy to forget, right? So beware putting too many NPCs in a scene because that will happen.
Yep.
Beware that the NPC has to have an exceedingly long amount of information to give out to the characters, right? Let the characters find that in different ways instead of doing that. None of these kinds of tips are here, and instead it just says, okay, let's look at how to craft them, right? Anything else you wanted to say to this?
Mhm. Yeah, what I mean, I agree that the NPCs don't need the complexity of a well-crafted character in a novel or movie. But what it needs to say is you need to craft it
Mm,
exactly to fit their purpose in your game, in your adventure. If you need
mhm,
a character to have a
yeah,
trait that will become important in the story, that they have that trait, make sure they have that trait. A character who is going to be a clue in a mystery needs to only have the trait that will tell the players what that clue is.
yeah,
And the word well crafted drives me a little bit uh gives me a little bit of a twinge because you can well craft something not necessarily complex, but the simplicity of the craft does what it needs to
yeah.
do. Now,
That's a
if you
really
want to then yeah.
I love what you're saying. That's a great way to crystallize it. That looking at the function your NPC has to play, and then design accordingly is really what you want. And nothing here is telling you to do that because your NPCs have roles to play. Even if you're improvising them on the spot, right? Then they're filling that need they are fulfilling the need the characters expressed, right? I need a glass blower. Well, here they are, right? And so they must do that. But if you're creating them ahead of time, then you want to know what is the function they play, and you want to execute on that. And none of what's in here, which is somewhat playing off of what was in fourth edition, really helps you do that. And part of it is I think they're so wedded to their ideals and so on, and we'll talk about all this stuff, but that they don't know how they give you too many characteristics because they're trying to make it work. But none of this also addresses the issue of how do I properly role play an NPC? How
Mhm.
do I create a
Right.
likable NPC? How do I create a NPC they will hate? Right? None of
Mhm.
that is there. And in some and so that's the problem when you give real concrete, detailed rules, as they sort of do here, right? With lots of tables, lots of steps. It makes you think that somehow this is a great NPC, and it need not be.
Mhm.
And a different approach would be more effective, right? And so if I think of like when we talked about Fate, we talked about how you take the major NPCs that are involved and you create their aspects. And aspects are pretty
Mhm.
flexible and pretty open, right? They're concepts, they're high concepts around these entities such that
Mhm.
you can easily play off of them. I find that a much better system than this, right? Or Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, Mike Shea has a section on NPCs, and he gives you this is such a different approach, right? He says when you're creating an NPC, think of a cool character in a movie, right? It can be Belloc from Raiders of the Lost Ark, or it can be Carson from Downton Abbey, something you know well, and now change it up, like switch the gender or change their accent or do something else that makes them into a different character and use that. And it's like that's brilliant, right? That is a brilliant way to do something, right? Think of a person, an entity, an NPC you already understand from some fiction, change it up so it isn't super recognizable, and you're there, right? Like, that's smart.
Or or make it super recognizable if that serves the purpose that you want the
Yeah,
character
yeah.
to serve in the adventure. Um, yeah, and so we get a section on quick NPCs versus detailed NPCs. And the book suggests for a quick NPC a trait or two that will make them memorable to the players. And my thing is, okay, do you want them to be memorable to the players? If every character that they come across is memorable, then none of them are memorable.
Mm,
If done in too great a number.
mhm,
You want them to be memorable for a reason that serves the purpose for the adventure. You want the thief to be that they catch pickpocketing to be memorable when they need to find out more information about the thieves guild to which this thief belongs.
mhm.
So that character then becomes memorable for their ineptitude,
Yeah.
but their connection to the thieves guild. Then if you're going to make a detailed NPC, they say, you want to answer these 10 questions
Mm,
with 10 sentences, each sentence discussing a particular trait from this list: occupation and history, appearance, abilities, talent, mannerism, interactions with others, useful knowledge, ideals, bonds, flaws, or secrets. And I'm just like, whoa, slow down there, cowboy. That's a lot to create
yeah.
even the most detailed NPC I can imagine in a game. I don't want all of those things. I'm not going to use all of those
Yeah.
things. That's a lot of effort.
Yeah. And I think that this is a nice list of possible ways you can flesh out an NPC. And that's what I like this section for,
Mhm,
right? Like to think through like what kind of things can I do to make their appearance stand out? Oh, here's a table of 20 things. You know, they have braided beard or
mhm,
hair. Okay, yeah, that could be a fun thing I could choose. Or unusual hair color, nervous eye twitch. Like that's not a bad thing that when I want to think about their appearance, I could go to this list. The idea that they have a
mhm,
high and a low ability. Oh, that's neat. You know, if I want to, for some NPCs, reinforcing that in a way that the players will understand. Oh, they're not very dexterous, right? You know, that can be helpful. Their talent, they're great with animals. You know, whatever. Okay, yeah, not a bad thing. But you don't want to do this for every single NPC you have, right? We
mhm,
and I mean, first, and what they try to say is that you're going to have 10 sentences. These should, which I think is their way of trying to say to keep it short. But 10 sentences is a lot on a page of your notes in an encounter. And by the way,
mhm.
there isn't a single D&D adventure that gives you this approach, right? No 5e published adventure has a list of NPCs with 10 lines under it. So they
Mm.
don't do this.
No.
No freelancer and their employees doing this, and no one should really, because and this goes it feeds off of what the player's handbook did. We talked about this with the bonds and the ideals and everything, and then these indeed have also ideals and bonds. It's too much. And even for characters that have like four things to remember, the DM can't remember them, the players can't remember about each other, and they're the stars. So when you add all this stuff to
Mhm,
NPCs, there's no way anyone's remembering this stuff. And it's an inflexible system. You as DM trying to remember the difference between their ideal and their bond to use it
mhm,
isn't a great system. A far better system is, like what Mike's saying with, choose to make it like Jane Urso and Rogue One. That's the NPC and play off of that, right? It's Andor. It's whoever, choose someone and play off that. Or something like Fate says, where you say they have these three kinds of aspects about them, right? Quick to be
mhm,
quickly, easily irritated, um,
mhm,
uh, dedicated to the captain's watch, and something, you just three things like that, and you just riff off of that,
Mhm.
and that'll be far better than
Yep.
some 10 lines you're going to try to read.
Yeah. Yeah, it really does go back to, before you look at this list of 10 things, which doesn't include name, by the way, which
Mhm.
is probably the hardest thing to do. Uh, before you look at this list, again, ask yourself, what is the purpose of this NPC? Is this NPC just there to sell glass vials? Then all
Mhm.
you need is an occupation and an appearance.
Yeah.
Um, is this is this non-player character is there going to be a twist?
Yeah.
Well, then maybe you do need to know the bond that this character has is with their partner who is ill. Now, since
Mhm.
this bond is there with this partner being ill, that gives you a way to make the character sympathetic to the characters. B, a way to give give another twist to the story. Since this glazier's significant other is ill, the enemies of the PCs might be able to bribe the glazier into putting poison in the vials. So when the characters pour the holy water or the poison or their potions in,
Yeah.
that poison rubs off. All right.
Mhm.
So now you want to look for a reason why they would do that. So you go to, okay, do I want them to be sympathetic? I'll give them this bond. Maybe their flaw is greed. Maybe they're doing it for money. Okay,
Right.
there's their flaw. It needs to fit the story. It needs to fit the game, and
Yeah.
all the other things. Yeah.
And that's something that this doesn't address is, what's even the point of all these things? It doesn't actually tell
Mhm.
you why you really need these things. And the reason you want to have these things exist is kind of two parts. On the one hand, you want to be able to remember this NPC to portray them in an interesting way and in a way that you'll remember across sessions if for some reason they come back to the glass blower, that you
Mm.
remember what you did with them, right? So and that's another reason why, if they say suddenly we're going to the glass blower, you can't write 10 things down while being a glass blower. You can scroll down an aspect,
Right.
right? Motivated by greed.
Yes.
Boom, done. You just scrawl that
Mhm.
while still looking forward at the characters. You scrawl that down and their name. And now you can remember. That's a
Mhm.
thing you can
Yeah.
work off of, right? The second thing is that
Right.
that whole speaking to your voice in the game, right? And so any NPC is an opportunity for you to reinforce all the themes in the adventure, in the setting, in the world. So the glass blower can be complaining about the taxes or about the despotic rule, or afraid to speak to it, right? Afraid that they're heroes because of what that entails, whatever it is. Those little things reinforce. And so the story of something like their ill family member is also an opportunity to speak to what that means in the larger society and create that kind of realism, right? And
Yeah.
it is, you say things that you couldn't otherwise say in passing about the setting through them. And again,
Yeah.
none of that's here, and nothing tells you how to facilitate that in the world. But those are things that when you're playing with a great DM, they do these things for you, and the world is constantly building around you through all the things they're saying, both descriptions and NPC words. And yeah, that's one of my favorite parts of the game.
Yeah. And another thing on that is the stories that you are telling with your players are works in progress. If you sit and you write down 10 things about an NPC and try to get all of those into the game, you lose the ability to then modify that later to fit a piece of the story.
Mhm.
You want the characters to go to the cave with the troll, but they keep missing that information. Oh, now I'm going to use this glassblower NPC. Uh, their bond is they have a sibling who's an adventurer. Oh, that adventurer went to the troll cave and hasn't come back yet. If you write down something the first time they meet the glass blower and say, "Oh no, this glass blower is not, doesn't have a partner and is an only child," then you remove yourself from the ability to change that later. So
Hmm.
the less information you give, sometimes the better, that you can later manipulate to fit the story exactly the way you need it to.
And one last thing I'd say is that NPCs often there's a skill to figuring out how your NPC does things that cause the players to react or enjoy or participate or
Mhm.
whatever. And it's very easy in your mind to think like they are an enigmatic stranger, and the player's like, "Cool, we need 2 glass bottles." you know,
Yep.
and
Yeah.
and so understanding, or just even like like the guards at the gate, right? They can just be there stoically, but better is when they say, "What brings you to town, adventurer?" And now they've got to answer that, and then you create, well, like creating a dialogue and maintaining a dialogue with NPCs is a skill. There could be something here to help you with that,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
like
For sure.
something that's really great is that the adventure hook often goes very poorly because it's an NPC saying, "Go do this thing," and you're like, "Cool, I guess I'll go do it." But it's a lot better if you ask questions of the NPCs, and it doesn't have to be just prove yourself. Why should I give you this quest? Because you're going to give them the quest, but asking things into the insight of the characters propels the story forward, right? I'm selling you winter gear. Tell me about the most dangerous place you've been to, right? Get the players talking.
Yep. Yeah. We get a section on monsters as NPCs, being told that the monsters can have all of these traits that we just talked about, just like a typical humanoid NPC can. That's good advice.
Mhm.
You don't want to overdo it, because sometimes a monster is a monster for a reason. And so you don't want to, if your players are new, to have the beholder, who is an entity that has its own history, be silly.
Mhm.
At least I don't think so.
Yeah.
You want them to, you want players to understand what these things are at their core before you play
Yeah.
off those tropes.
Right.
So you could do it a bit, but I hesitate, like I said, especially when I'm running for new players, to go too far afield for something that already should have sort of its own personality in terms of its role in the history of the game.
You know how I know that I don't look at this
We
chapter
all,
often?
yeah,
I look at the art and I'm like, I don't remember ever seeing this art in my life. Like that's how seldomly. And in
yeah,
fact, I was with another person who I know works on a lot of official material, and they said, like, there was a sort of like a rumor that there was new art being revealed for the 2024 DMG. I'm like, I think that is in the current DMG, and that's what it turned out to be, is that they just used existing art in like a press announcement or something, but it was not some revealed future art. Just nobody remembered that art existed in the DMG.
that's funny. And
And
then we get told that NPC statistics. Uh, NPCs can be given a stat block for a typical monster and then just reskinned, or NPCs can be built just like PC characters. Now, if you do that, and if it's something that the players are going to fight, you need to use Chapter 9 to determine the NPC's challenge rating if you create one to be like a character.
Mhm.
And we will get to all that
Oh yeah.
when we cover Chapter 9. Mm. So
You
what about
know,
NPC party members?
yeah. So I mean, this is a part that I know well because I looked at it a lot when we were working on the Ack Inc. book, trying to think about what is the right way that people who are working in a company or adventuring group or something like that would get support and be able to rise in stature and have people doing things for them, because that's what this section is sort of trying to say through various types of NPCs that you either bring into your party to adventure with or are pulling into to do different things with in some other capacity. And so it talks about low level followers and adventure NPCs, and my guess is all of this will be vaporized, and maybe they will bring in the what's the name of the system? Just escaped my mind.
Sidekicks?
Sidekicks. Yes, thank you.
Mhm.
We don't see that a whole lot, but we've seen it in some adventures. So maybe that will come in and replace this because it's probably a better system to use for how you can use that. Um, they do have a really interesting thing here, this optional rule, loyalty, that I think is not particularly wonderful. It uses a scale between 0 to 20 based on the highest charisma score of all adventurers in the party. And then anytime they do something bad to them, you take like 2d4 and reduce it by that amount, which to me is way too many bad things that you could do to somebody before they would leave your employ. Uh, and what it also means is if you don't really do a lot, like if they're just like, say, doing your dishes at home, they will continue doing that until the end of time, right? If you just don't do much with them, which is the reality of a lot of these kinds of things, is they just exist there. So this loyalty score really only comes into play if you like give them a magic item and they get happy momentarily, or you abuse them, in which case it doesn't adjust enough. Like this is a weird system. No, thank you.
Yeah, the two things that I want to say about this is it doesn't talk about the phenomenon that we know as the DMPC, the Dungeon Master Player Character. And a lot of groups do this, especially if they don't have a lot of players. The DM will have a player character who they will run as a regular player character. And it's totally fine to do if done well, but we do get the horror stories of the DMs who make it all about their player character, and the other player characters at the table sort of become second banana to this DM who is essentially, playing the game for themselves rather than playing for the entire party. So it would have been good to say something about that here, right? If you do, and they do say if you have a player character that's with the party that's a non-player character, even if you run it, let them make decisions and let them, it would have been good to spell that out and say you don't want your non-player characters to overwhelm the story.
Yeah. And there are a lot of ways to advice you could give. Like when I ran the Ack Inc. adventure for my middle school group, there is a character in there in the part that you wrote that is very memorable, a sidekick that could come along. And it was, so one of the things I did is I said, well, okay, each session, a different player gets to run with them. And you can play your interactions more closely because of that. And so it was neat to see over time, like some people would, everybody would do their things and everybody liked this character. But some people would really particularly lean into that relationship. And so then there would be closer relationships between them, which was neat. And I could use that in the storytelling. But it kept the action interesting and kept everybody having something fun to do, right? It was neat.
And when it comes to loyalty scores, it's fine to gamify this, but as you say, if they do something horrible to a non-player character, shove them into the mouth of the dragon, and it's, oh, well, that's really bad. So that's 2d4. Oh, I rolled 2 ones, so that it only your score goes from a 15 down to a 13. It seems like that would be something that the non-player character would just walk away at that point. So if you want to gamify it, fine. But if you gamify it, players will gamify it.
Yeah.
And sometimes the story would need to take precedence over the die roll.
Yeah. Yeah. Then we get this section on contacts and patrons, which the contact section is just really brief. It doesn't do a whole lot about what they can do. And I think this is where you could have a more interesting discussion of campaigns where contacts make sense and what they can allow you to do. Similarly with patrons, it's just a 2-paragraph piece here. Now we do have the patron system in Eberron, which then was revised slightly in Xanathar's. That's a really neat system of patronage where really you're working for an entity. And I would guess that that's going to make it into the 2024 version of this and will be a lot stronger.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think that it was chapter 1 of Rising from the Last War. That's how strongly they believed in that system, and it was really good. We get a section on hirelings, which again is very short, and it just basically says you can hire people to do some things. It makes me think back to AD&D, where charisma was basically used for two things and two things only. One was to get your instant reaction to someone, and the other was to see how long your hirelings would put up with you. Uh, so,
Yeah.
same thing here. It's
And
generally more of a role playing thing.
I would hope, if I could wave a magic wand, I would hope that Wizards would read what we did in Ack Inc. around how hirelings can be a big part of what you do through downtime, right? Which I think
Mhm.
there's a little bit of that in the core rules, but there isn't a lot of it. And we really leaned into that. And I think that's a system that could really work, because often what players want to do is have agency in the world, right? And you see that as far back as like, oh, when you get to be a certain level cleric, you'll have a temple. Great, but what does that mean, right? And nobody knew what that should
Mhm.
mean. And I think we now see enough examples, including in the Ack Inc. book, that you could draw from to say players should have some ability to have agency in the world when they want it, right? They can set up a base of operations, hire a few people for relatively little coin, and have them do things for you, right? Execute downtime for you.
Mhm.
And here's how to do that. And you could do that in a really simple manner. You don't have to go to the detail levels that are in the Ack Inc. book. We just, have a method by which your hirelings can carry things out carry out
Mhm.
downtime tasks is I think the easiest way to do it, because you already have those tasks there, right? You can just play off of that.
When I ran the Ack Inc. game, my players, who are generally pretty hack and slash straightforward, send us to the dungeon, let us kill things, and we'll come back. We were spending 2 hours during a session managing the coin and managing what we were doing with these hirelings, what we were doing with these people. They sent one off to the Phoenix University of Waterdeep to learn magic better.
Uh-huh.
Another one, we sent them off to explore, not a dangerous place, but to map out this other place that we might be interested in. To the point where when we finished the Ack Inc. campaign, they wanted to play a campaign where they played these hirelings who have now gone off on their own as adventurers.
Yeah.
If you had said that that would happen with this group, I would have said that will never happen in a million years. And it did. And it didn't take, you specifically worked on those rules. Uh, and it was just, it worked out really, really well.
Yeah.
So
Good.
I would too like to see that moving forward.
And there's a lot that can happen that
We
is nice
get,
to have
yeah.
your mind open to. Like when I ran Tomb of Annihilation, I had these sort of hirelings. I was sort of playtesting these rules as they're being written that are in Ack Inc. But something that was fun was there was so much of the jungle we hadn't explored in the jungles of Chult, and so they ended up taking the B team, as we called it, which were the hirelings, and the hirelings
Mhm.
became, we made NP or character versions of them. Basically, started with NPC stat blocks and then made them into full fledged characters, so they could explore the rest of the storyline while we were in the tomb. And that was really nice because it changed
Mhm.
up that tenor. It wasn't just we're in the tomb forever. It was like, well, we're in the tomb a good amount, and now let's cut away to what the B team's doing, and it also let them tell
Mhm.
different stories, right? So the B team focused a little more on the history of Chult and who gets to control it, and getting the foreign powers
Mhm.
out of there, while the other group was saving the world. And that was really nice to be able to go back and forth through these systems, right? And
Yeah,
there
I
could be
like
a
that.
little bit to help that, I think, here. And you don't need an entire system for it, but just to be able to speak to that possibility that, hey, the hirelings you own can make for fun adventuring. And I think it was Van Richten's talked about that a little bit, right? And so pulling that in here would be really great.
Mhm. There's a very short section on extras saying there are other people in the world, and that is true. You only need to highlight them when the characters need to call them out for some reason.
And
Then we get a
4E,
section on villains, and I was like, "Oh, yeah,
that section comes right out of 4E. The extras, the allies, that kind of piece. It's all, it's
yeah,
funny. They just lift and move.
yep." Then we get villains, and I thought, "Okay, here we go. We're gonna get into villains," and it was really underwhelming. It was just table after table after table of schemes and methods and secret weaknesses and motivations and it's good. It's not bad that it's a bunch of tables, but it's not like Here's how to tell a great story with a villain. Here's how villains work as game mechanics and as story mechanics, right? Yeah, and it was just sort of here's tables.
Yeah. And it's okay to have these tables when you have something else that's helping you.
Mhm.
And then this is the idea generation bit, but this is not the thing, right? One does not just work through these tables and have a great story or a great villain even. It's more like you want to be working on your concept of your villain, and then maybe these things help you when you're kind of hitting a wall. Is the way I'd look at this, but
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. And the other thing is when you
And the
roll on these
last two
tables, and
things,
they should tell you this, both these tables and the ones on the NPCs, if you just roll on these tables, they won't necessarily make sense or create
mhm,
a cohesive thing. And so you'll actually end up
right.
with a bad result if you just roll on these things. You want to, even if you're rolling, you want to keep rolling until it gels, and then sit back and look at the thing and go, is this really a person? Do I really have a villain, or do I
Mhm,
have an amalgamation? Okay, let's redo. Right.
mhm. Yeah. And the last two things we get are new domains, new subclasses for the bad guys. We get the Death Domain Cleric and the Oathbreaker Paladin. And of course, as this was really the first splat book for fifth edition, because as soon as these two things came out, everyone wanted to play Death Domain Clerics or Oathbreaker Paladins. Even if they weren't the most powerful
Mm-hmm.
subclasses, people just wanted to because it was the new
Yeah.
thing. And what I want to highlight about these is how they are really made specifically to be villains,
Mm-hmm.
not just story wise, but game mechanically. Um, the things that you want from a villain are to be uh, to hit a lot and to be hit a lot, right? You want them to be dangerous, but fall when it's their time in the story to fall, and that's what these domains and subclasses do. And as PC subclasses, they don't work for me as well
Mm-hmm.
because of that. They're built in mind for a scene where they're very dangerous and then they fall.
Mm-hmm.
And to put them as player characters who don't fall, but who continually are able to do these things makes them very, very powerful.
As somebody who's played a Death Cleric, because I got a special cert for Adventurers League in like year one of the
Me
campaign.
too.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's all true. But
So,
also,
like,
I was just gonna say, also, the idea of creating a whole class or a villain, to me, this is too much, right? There's a reason in Forge of Foes why we went with things like monster powers, because I don't know that you
mhm.
need all this to support these ideas and these concepts, right? It's a pretty heavy thing. It's fine. I know some people like to create a whole character sheet for their villain, but just say that your NPC stat block
Yeah.
does this.
This should be an NPC stat block because what happens is you get things like the Death Cleric's first level ability, which is Reaper. You learn a necromancy cantrip. When you attack with it, you can target two creatures instead of just one. When this book came out, there were only two necromancy cantrips.
Mm-hmm.
There was Chill Touch and there was Spare the Dying.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
unless you were going to need to get two characters up from, making
Zero.
death saves, you were going to take Chill Touch. Now you can also take Toll the Dead with this, which is a big winner. So automatically too powerful. The 17th level improved Reaper is you can use a necromancy spell of first through fifth level, and basically twin it to affect two targets instead of one with necromancy spells of up to fifth level. Well, yeah, okay, we're going to do Rave Enfeeblement. That's fine. That's understandable. That's what a bad guy would do.
Mm-hmm.
but Twin Revivify, right? Twin Raise Dead. It's a 5th level spell that targets only one creature, so I can get 2 of my allies up via Revivify instead of just 1. Right? It's not meant for that.
Right.
It's meant to so that's why things like that should be its own stat block for the bad guy rather than its own subclass.
Yeah. And I mean, it even speaks
And
to if you choose to allow a player, to have these, and it's like, you should know better.
right. Right. I mean, look at the Oathbreaker. One of the things they get is control undead. So they can use a channel divinity to make an undead creature its servant. So you could have a 4th level paladin who's fighting a white, take control of the white. The white then, when it kills something, and it will kill something if it's with the party, can control a zombie that it, raise thing as a zombie that it kills, and can have up to 12 zombies. So if it keeps failing its save with your channel divinity, you have to refresh it every 24 hours. Now, this of course is meant for someone to fight against, right? It's the paladin with the white servant, and that's it. But as a PC, now I'm like, well, I have this white who has 12 zombies with it, who I can bring along with me everywhere I go. Just have to make that channel divinity roll at the start of the day, and we're good to go. It's special.
Yeah.
So, thoughts overall on chapter 4?
I think it does a good job at being what this edition seems to want out of a Dungeon Master's Guide, which is inspiration. It provides a lot of inspiration. And it's way better than some of the early editions that just give you almost nothing. But it really does need more advice. And I think it's behind the times on what it could teach you about the game of being a DM and how you use NPCs for so many different ways in your game. And it doesn't speak to that, and it should. It should really recognize that, and hopefully the 2024 version does that.
Yep, it's given the 2024 version lots of room to be an advice book, and then refer back to this for inspiration.
Yeah.
So we are now done. Next time we will look at chapter 5, Adventure Environments. But I want to thank everyone out there listening or watching. We do appreciate your audiencehood, and you keep us coming back for more. And what really keeps us coming back for more are our patrons. We have Master of Dungeon patrons and supporters. Thank you. We have a special shout out to our Master of Realms supporters in our show notes, and that list continues to grow, and we very much appreciate it. But those masters of the multiverse, those patrons, they get a very special shout out on the show, including Graham Ward, James Walton, Joe Tyler, Krishna Simone, say, Ross Sandberg, Chance Russo at Drago Russo, Post Fiction RPG Audio, Falcon Neal, Sean Molly, The Micro Ant, Eric Mengi, The Mathemagician, Chad Lynch, Travis Lee, Jim Klingler at DM Prime Mover, Brian King, Sean Hurst, Ben Heisler and Paige Lightman, Andy Edmonds at Nerdronomicon.com, Darren Chandler, Evil John, Merrick Blackman, Steve Bissonette, Craig Bailey, and Keith Amon of The Monsters Know What They're Doing. Thank you all for your support. And you, yes, you can become a patron of our show by going to patreon.com/masteringdnd. If you get a chance, you can also leave a review for us on Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Also, you can subscribe to us via YouTube at our YouTube channel at Mastering Dungeons YouTube channel. Whew. Teos, people find where?
People find alphastream.com. No, alphastream.org. Don't go to alphastream.com. I don't even know what that is.
No.
Who knows?
You don't want to know what that is.
You don't. I don't want to know. But alphastream.org, you can find me there. My latest blog is up, and there's another one on its way. What about you, Shawn? Where do we find you?
All the usual hangouts at Twitter at Shawn Merwin, podcast at Mastering D&D, Mastodon. The show is at Dice Camp, Dice.camp. But obviously the Patreon and the YouTube channel. So we now know all about creating NPCs, even if we don't know exactly how to use them. So what are we going to do now?
Well, we're going to open a portal to the multiverse, multiple portals to multiple multiverses. We're going to find NPCs that are actually me, and we're going to have them create all the things that I wish I had the time to create.
At alphastream.com.
That's where you'll find them. Yeah.
Okay.
In another universe, I got that URL and it was great. Yeah.
That's good. Good. One of you is forward thinking.